Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to this impromptu live stream with Evan Collins, who is one of our patrons here at Pints with Aquinas. Awesome dude. Got to chatting with him, and he said that he would love to come on the show and to discuss his conversion from from Buddhism to Christianity. Make sure I get that right. A couple of things I want to let you know before we jump into this discussion. First, we now have these fantastic beer steins available again. They were out of commission for a while, but they are back in action. So if you want to become a patron like this Evan fellow, you get a bunch of free stuff in return. We're about to do a course on Augustine's Confessions, so I think you're going to love that. It's going to be a video series with a professor from the University of Dallas. And then also I have to show you, let's see here, this. Boom. Cameron Bertuzzi and I are starting a channel where we just react to videos and things. So it's called Cam and Matt React. I'm going to put a link in the description below. Be sure to subscribe. Once we get 1,000 subscribers, we're going to start doing weekly live streams. People have been appreciating our back and forth, so I think you'll like it as well. So be sure to check out that. Cam and Matt React. Come on. There we go. Okay, let's see. I'll bring you back up on screen now. Evan, what's up?
Hey, Matt.
Thanks for being here, brother.
Really happy to be here. And plug the products,
Yeah, do that simultaneously. I mean, it's a lot of whiskey, but I think that's what I like about it.
Well, big gulps,
Hey, before we get into the show, you have to tell people this story about your gigantic crucifix and the awkward situation you found yourself in just a few days ago.
Oh no. Oh my gosh. So, really good friend of mine. You're talking about the wedding rehearsal? Yep. Okay. Really good friend of mine. So I have this huge crucifix because, go big or go home. I'm American from the Midwest. And I love this crucifix, and I wear it with me. Anytime I'm not wearing a tie, I'm wearing this. And so I was at a wedding rehearsal with two of my best friends from college. They're getting married, praise God. And I went to hug her. It'd been a really long time. And I hug her, and I go up because she's shorter than me. I'm 6 foot something. And it gets caught right in her dress. And I had to awkwardly scoop out. She thought it was really funny. And her husband, because they actually already are married because of the Corona thing. They're doing this as like a thing for all their family and friends to be there. She was like, Greg, he's stepping up on you. And I was like, I'm so sorry, Greg. And Greg said, Evan's a great guy. Nothing's going on there. But she thought it was hilarious. So it was. I understand why the bishops do this now.
Yes.
I get it now.
Yes. I love it. Well, that's fantastic. Well, to everybody watching, we're going to spend about 20 minutes talking about Evan's conversion story, and then we're going to be taking your questions. So don't go anywhere. I'll let you know when to write in your questions. I can see, by the way, all of these comments right now. We got people from Brazil. It looks like, California, Netherlands. This is awesome. Berlin. Tell us where you're from. Alabama, not as exotic, but I'm a big fan. So tell us where you're from. And then Philippines. Isn't this beautiful? Glory to Jesus Christ. And so I'll let you guys know when we're going to take some questions, and then we'll throw your comments up on the screen for Evan. So Evan, I don't know a lot about you, except that you're an amazing person who's a patron of Pints with Aquinas. So, I'm a big fan of you already. I know that you used to be a practicing Buddhist, so I'd just love to learn a little bit about your story. How did you grow up as, religion-wise, and then when were you first introduced to Buddhism?
Yeah, so I'm from the Midwest, and I grew up in a nominally Christian household, I guess you could say. So my dad was Catholic but wasn't practicing, and my mom was Missouri Synod Lutheran, so a more conservative type of Lutheran. But we were sent to a Catholic school when we were little kids because my mom thought that would be the best way to ensure that we would become all be good Christians. Because my dad, but we never talked about religion at home. I got to make that very clear because it was just something that my dad did not want to talk about. And so as soon as I was out of school, like church school, I was like I've graduated from Christianity because none of it had ever made any sense to me. I had actually always felt a deep attraction to beauty, to the practice of piety as a child, but I had no system of faith or real system of belief in my head. I was just like, there's God, I guess he's this Jesus guy. And as soon as I got out of that, I pretty much immediately became an atheist because there was no roots. It was just like, this, like the parable of the sower, right? There was no root, anything like that. Sun came out, immediately scorched.
How old were you when you became an atheist?
Probably like 13 or 14 or something.
And did you use the term atheist or
I did,
agnostic?
I would have used the term atheist. I mean, initially I would have.
Was that a thing? Was it cool when you were 13? I mean, was Richard Dawkins in full swing? I don't know how old you were.
All the memes and stuff were out there, right? So like, I mean, I just went from going to a private school to a public school. Atheism was like totally normal and accepted, and it made me feel like a more intellectually honest person to say that, because I was operating like I didn't believe in anything. So
yeah, okay. So 13 years old, you said you're an atheist. Okay.
So then, because I had that initial attraction, so it's good to lay this out because I don't want anybody to feel like there's a cultural insensitivity who has raised a Buddhist their entire life or something like that, because there's a difference there, of course, within like how you would experience these things. But I pretty much immediately after that discovered what modern psychology was, and was really fascinated with this. Oh no, did I just cut out?
You've frozen a little bit, but we can still hear you.
Okay.
You're still frozen, but you know it's a nice freeze. It's not like your mouth is agape and you look strange.
Sure.
So
I just saw it. Okay, I'll continue anyway.
Just continue, and hopefully it'll kick back in.
And so I found out about modern psychology, and I was really fascinated with that. And I thought, well, this totally explains the human person. So materialism is what I was really believing at that point. I didn't have a name for it at that time, but materialism. And so then I thought I had never really knew about other religions growing up. I mean, I didn't even really know about my religion growing up. So to be fair, like it's one of those things that was just not coming up for me. And I learned about Buddhism through like just the class. And man, the camera is really tripping me up. I really want that to turn back on.
We could, do you want to call me back?
Maybe we should do that because, I have no idea why it didn't start.
All right, why don't you hang up and give me a call right back?
All right.
This isn't awkward at all. Everyone just sit still. Go. Hang up. Call me back.
Come on.
All right. He's gone. He's gone. So now we can speak about him. What do you think about Evan? Honestly though, what do you think about him? I don't think he's dating anyone. Ladies, if you're interested, you could, I could ask him out for you over the air, really. All right, this is awkward. Call me back. Just so everybody knows, if Evan doesn't call me back, I have pretty much nothing to say on Buddhism. So, if you were looking for some incredible... Here's what we'll do. While we're waiting for him, why don't we take some comments here in the live stream, and I'll pop you up onto the screen so everyone can read your fantastic comments. So you give me your most witty comments, and I'll throw them up here. So Buddhism denies God, right? I love to be with Jesus. There's Godnod. Everyone go follow Godnod. She's doing amazing stuff on YouTube. I recently followed her myself. Good to have you here. And Jonathan thinks he's great. That's good. Glad you think he's great. I expect the final vid on YouTube to be edited here. Yes, it will be edited here, I think. We will see. TR loves technology. Oh.
Back?
We got him. He's back. He's back.
Praise God. Okay, so
no problem.
Getting to high school, and I'm really interested in modern psychology. I'm a practicing materialist at this point, and I still really want to believe in something more than just that I'm just some composite of all these things and XYZ, but I didn't want to be intellectually dishonest with what I believed so I discovered what I discovered what Buddhism was.
Stop looking at yourself. That's the problem. This is the lesson we should learn here.
Vanity, vanity. All things are vanity. I discovered what Buddhism is because of just religion class. So I'm in immediately. I'm very fascinated with what the Buddha had to say, because like what we were saying before the show, there's something just intriguing about the things that aren't what you've always grown up around. Like
totally.
There's an interest that you have. And I was in, so I bought a bunch of Buddhist texts, Theravadan text, Mahayana text. Those are like the two major types of Buddhism, basically, you could say. And I just started reading. What did the Buddha say? And I was instantly hooked, because I felt like what the Buddha was describing about suffering and dukkha and everything like that was just absolutely true.
So pretend we know nothing, which isn't far from the truth. Just kind of give us like in a nutshell, like what is it that you were reading and why was it attractive to you?
Okay, so I was reading the Pali Canon, I guess you could say, and I was reading what would be considered like the earlier text, the earlier Buddhist text. So I'll just give a direct example, right? So there's this great talk where the Buddha is being asked about suffering, and he talks about how suffering is like he talks about arrows, how in life you get hit with arrows, basically, and he says that you can never control when you get hit basically by the first arrow, but you can control what you do to avoid getting hit by a second. And I found that very, very fascinating. Now, a kind of a more Western equivalent of that would probably be Stoicism, something
That's what I was
more
thinking.
similar.
Yeah,
exactly. And so I was really intrigued by this understanding of the Buddha had this deep recognition of the flaws and faults of reality and how painful being alive and existing actually is. And so
not wrong.
But he also knew that wasn't everything. And so he had practiced intensive asceticism, because he was Indian. The Buddha was from India. I hope a lot of people know that, historically speaking. And he had been with a bunch of these mendicant, basically, like types people, like preachers, like sorts of like yogis, mystic type of things. Like I'm using words that I hope normal people would understand.
Sure.
But basically these holy men who were trying to pursue holiness, and they were trying to pursue holiness by basically completely like restricting the flesh and the passions and everything like that. So the Buddha tried to do that, and he almost died. And he had a bunch of followers, and he realized there's got to be a middle way. There's got to be a way that's not just pure hedonism, but also isn't starving yourself to death. And so what I think the Buddha basically discovered, and this is my charitable take, this is not like, I guess, like a standard opinion, but I think the Buddha was describing basically natural law, virtue according to natural means.
Right. That's funny you say that, because I mean that is what Aristotle talks about with that the middle ground, right? Virtue being the mean between the extremes.
Yeah, exactly. And so so the Buddha didn't want to get caught up in all of like basically what we would consider to be theology. He thought it was actually inhibiting and distracting from virtue. So at this point in time, I pretty much put theology totally back shelf entirely. It's totally gone. And then I'd start going to a Buddhist monastery nearby, where it's a really beautiful place, mountains, hills, a bunch of wineries are out there, so it's good. And I would go out there every weekend, and I would go and I'd meditate with a bunch of other Buddhists. Most of these people were actually from Asia. They were like had been Buddhist their entire life. There were also a lot of like converts, I guess you could say, like me, that were there as well. And I would go and I'd eat with them and I'd share life with them and all these things. And I did that all all throughout high school into the beginning of college, and I until my sophomore year of college. So
tell us what sort of guidance they gave you when you went there to meditate.
So they gave me a lot of books. Like they had a lot of free books to give you, like a lot of Q&A type books, things like that, all those sorts of things. I was already doing a lot of reading on my own, so the books were helpful. But when I went to meditate, it very much wasn't very guided.
Okay.
So I went to speak, but like there was like cultural norms that you picked up on through just presence being there. But the meditation was very much like you sit and
That's
and
it.
yeah, if in regards to guidance, that's really how it was. Now they did give me some guidance, but I think they would have instructed me more if I would have asked for it, but I didn't because I was like, I already know what to do because I'm doing this on my own.
Okay, so what is okay? So what is it that what is it that people do then when they meditate in Buddhism? They sit. What do you do?
So it depends. The type
Are you
of
thinking of
Buddhism.
something? Are you just focusing on your breath?
Well, you can't not think about something, right? So
That's
I
right.
mean, if you understand like what the mind is, right? I mean, like it's impossible to not actually think about something.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not necessarily like the total goal. The goal is basically like to enter into a deep form of contemplation, I guess you could say. Now, it's not like what the rosary is, where you're contemplating a particular mystery, but it's more so like this understanding of like there's Buddhist like beliefs about the self and things like that, like anatta, like there's no self and all these things, and so the meditation was kind of almost like, how could I best explain it? Platonism, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So like how Platonists kind of thought that through like these types of practices you could almost achieve like unity with the one, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's almost like the opposite. There is no one, but you are achieving unity with the true nature of yourself, which is actually nothing.
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
Not really.
So I was in Nagarjuna like he's a very famous Asian Buddhist writer, and so what I would be considered would be like a very extreme form of like Zen Buddhism type of thing. So is what I was kind of practicing. Now Zen, that has so many
Yeah.
what that means basically,
Yeah.
but
Well, tell us. Can you sum it up? I mean, by the way, I know that like whenever we sum something up, we're leaving things out, and I know you want to do justice to the beliefs that you were learning and participating in. So I appreciate that, but just for the sake of brevity, what is it you mean by Zen Buddhism?
Basically what I mean by Zen Buddhism. So okay, something that might be helpful to say. So the goal of Buddhism is to live the Noble Eightfold Path. Is the Noble Eightfold Path recognizing the Four Noble Truths. And Matt's going to put those in the show notes. No, I'm just kidding. So all of these things are about acquiring virtue, basically within the proper understanding of where you are in reality. So I would almost say, are you familiar with AA 12 steps, these sorts of things? This deep understanding of powerlessness that 12 steps have, I would say is very much, that idea is very present in this concept of like, there's really not a lot that I can actually control in the world, but the few things that I have a say for all need to be done to bring compassion into being, so that other beings can have the opportunity to reach enlightenment at some point when rebirth happens, basically. It's hard because there's so many different types of Buddhism. So this would be like going up to a Christian and saying, well, what's the whole purpose of Christianity here? Can you sum that up for me really quick?
I feel like Christians could give a basic summary of that.
They could, because they're a creed religion, right? So
okay.
I guess it's a little easier because there's even creeds within. What is like the earliest creed is in like Corinthians, right, or something, right?
Sure.
So I mean, yeah. So
But with Buddhism, it's a little more difficult. What do you say to those who say that Buddhism is more of a philosophy than a religion? And if you agree, what does that mean?
I think a lot of in college I studied philosophy, I studied comparative religions, and I studied communications. And so I actually wrote my senior project on defining what a religion actually is.
Okay.
And it's a really vague category.
It is a vague category. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you say that religion is a set of beliefs that concern life, death, morality, the supernatural.
That's philosophy, basically.
It's philosophy, but it also puts atheism in the category of religion to some degree. So it is vague sort of.
It's tough because I don't know. We'd always go for. I would say Buddhism is a religion, and I would say usually when people are trying to say that Buddhism is not a religion, it's done to minimize Buddhism, to say that it doesn't have like some form of sacrifice or something like this, or it's like, like most things that are going to be considered non-religions are going to be Eastern religions by most people. So
Gotcha.
if Buddhism isn't a religion, then people will say Confucianism is not a religion and Taoism is not a religion.
Right.
And all these.
In fact, you have Protestants who say Christianity is not a religion.
Yeah.
It's a relationship.
Yeah. So I don't.
Okay.
I would say Buddhism's a religion. I mean, because a large group of people believe it. It pertains to beliefs about the meaning of life and reality, but philosophies do that too. But I think most philosophies can easily be harmonized within religious traditions, whereas religions tend to be talking about some type of revealed knowledge in some sense.
Okay.
So like the Buddha achieved some type of perfection of knowledge, right? That we would almost say was divine. And so like that's kind of like why it would almost be a religion, right?
Fair enough. I feel like I've knocked you off your conversion story. So I apologize for that. You were talking about going to the monastery and meditating.
I loved it. I loved the monastery. I loved everybody there. They were so kind and compassionate. And the primary forms of meditation that I was doing was this deep focus on compassion, because I really liked the emphasis in this Mahayana school of Buddhism that was all about getting everybody else on the car. Like everyone should be free from this suffering, And so when I was at the monastery, and all these things, it was very profound. And so I really wanted to basically not be evangelical, but I wanted to share my beliefs with other people. So in college, I started a Buddhist organization pretty much as soon as I got there, as soon as I could, and got people to start coming, meditating with me and all these things and stuff like that. But I also in college was required, because I went to a liberal arts university, was required to take a class on philosophy and religion. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to take a class on the philosophy of religion, because I wanted to prove all those Christians wrong, because I thought that they were like dogmatists, all these things and stuff like that. And so I really wanted to prove them wrong, because I felt like their beliefs were not logically substantiated. Mm-hmm. And so I took this class, and lo and behold, in this class, I was wrong, because I started in this class, I was taught what logic was. I'd never been taught logic in a formal sense in school. And I was taught what logic was, like basic syllogisms, modus ponens, modus tollens, all those things. And I was like, okay, this is definitely the way to start figuring out truth. Like, this is really profound. And so I was given all these analytical arguments. So my professor, what he would do is he'd take all these proofs for the existence of God from history, like all of them, like that you could basically think of all the major players. So Maimonides, Ibn Rushd, Ibn Sina, Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, Aristotle, even some Platonic proofs, all these series, all the way up to even modern guys like Plantinga and stuff like that. And he broke them all down into like analytical arguments, like what William Lane Craig does, basically. And I know that you lost my video here. But,
that's okay. Yeah, it's all right. Let's just keep going.
But I through that, specifically, I came to believe in an unmoved mover, basically. Mm-hmm. So a philosophical God, so to speak, which Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. So I didn't feel very threatened by that, actually. But like I told you before, what it did cause me to do is, well, it seems like a pretty big deal if this God thing is real. Because this seems to be a fundamental aspect of reality. And if the Buddha thought that this wasn't important at all, maybe he could have been wrong, and maybe I'm wrong. Because I was always actually very open. I think I always had a deep sense of seeking the truth. I was restless for truth. I was restless for it. And so I was taking this class, and I was really blown away by it, and started going to philosophy club like every other week or every other week and all these things, and just getting in these really great debates and discussions with people. And I was talking with one of my professor after class, because I was that guy who did that.
Nice.
And he said, you should take this this class I'm teaching next semester, it's on one of the most influential books in the Western canon. And you can't consider yourself to be an educated person unless you've taken this class.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I'm intellectually prideful and I want to consider myself to be an educated person. And so I took this class, and the class was on the Confessions of Saint Augustine. Now, he called Augustine one of the greatest Western philosophers. So, I mean, my professor is Orthodox, not Catholic. So that's a good point to point out there. So, because usually Orthodox people are not talking about Augustine that often. So he taught this class, and I signed up for it, and I started taking this class. And in this class, what we had to do was we went through the entire book of Confessions, like chapter by chapter, and really broke down Augustine's conversion and his philosophy at all points in his life. So we read a biography of his as well. Like, we read a biography that's written about him as well, a very thorough one. And then we talked about the philosophy that Augustine believed and how his personal conversion led him to change his philosophical views and all these things.
Yeah.
And that was the game changer for me, because what that did was it gave me a thorough understanding of Platonism and how early Christianity understood Plato and understood so with Plato I get the natural law tradition, right? That I was already found super attractive within Buddhism, and that is what drew me to it. And also within Plato I get this understanding that I actually have to help other people. I still have like this type of altruism, I guess, that I was holding on to. But within Plato, what Augustine got so perfectly right was this idea of there's higher pleasures that have to be sacrificed for lower pleasures, and there's still suffering in the world. Augustine completely and utterly recognized that. So all of these things that had drawn me to Buddhism were answered within Augustine's worldview, his Catholic worldview, and were even seemed even more beautiful and extravagant to me than what was beautiful and extravagant about Buddhism to me, which it was. And so I remember, it wasn't like I didn't sit down and like one day I wasn't like just sitting there in mood lighting, and all of a sudden an angel came down from my side and was singing in my ear, and I was like, Jesus Christ is the one true God. Like, it wasn't like that. I was studying, I think, and I finished studying and I was walking somewhere, and walking, I had this very still small voice thought, it's very logical and reasonable and seems good to think that Jesus is God. And so I went to my professor the next day after class, and I think I waited like an hour or two after class because a bunch of students had a lot of questions. I think we were talking about free will that class that day. So it was a very complicated subject. And I went to him and I said, so Jesus is God. What do I do?
Oh, beautiful.
And he was like, well, do you so he actually asked me like, well, what are the people around you, like the Christians around you? He was trying to like work with what I had. And I said, well, I know some Catholics, and these sorts of things. And he was like, well, you should reach out to them and ask to get a spiritual director. And you should write down your conversion story so that you don't forget it.
Glory.
And
now, just to interject here, I mean, you said earlier that you were hungry for truth, right? That you were just like restless, is the word you used, which is ironic given that within the first couple of pages of the Confessions, Augustine just says that very thing. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you, or they are disquieted until they are quieted in Him. So what a perfect book for you to read. I mean, did you really resonate with Augustine's search for truth?
I don't think I've ever resonated with a book more deeply than I have with the Confessions. I was studying for class and I was crying studying for class. I mean,
Glory to
Augustine's
Jesus Christ. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I actually almost, and maybe I'll still do this, but I actually was planning on getting a tattoo of that exact verse in the original Latin
Of
script, like
course, of
right
course.
where Jesus was pierced with the lance. But because that pierced me, it was actually so struck, and I actually had to memorize parts of the confessions for class, and so that was one of the first things I memorized. Um,
Hmm.
my other favorite line is, "Oh, beauty so ancient, so new, how late
Mm,
have I longed for thee."
mm.
Um,
Preach it. Yeah.
yes. Absolutely true.
Gee, that's really beautiful. Here's
Mm.
what I think we'll do. We'll continue if you're okay with that, and then what we'll do is before we take questions, maybe you can hang up and call me back so we can see your beautiful face moving again.
Oh, thank you.
Is that
Yeah.
okay?
I
Yeah.
mean, I think my face might be the thing that's breaking the camera. So, but
It's that good. It's that good.
yeah, it's just that gorgeous.
Why do we do? Why do we do that now? Is it okay? Why don't you hang up and just call me right back? And is that all right?
Why not? Why
Yeah,
not?
let's do it. Yeah, for those who are watching, we've been doing these like video series on Patreon. We just did one on Flannery O'Connor. We just did one on the Great Books of Western Civilization. We're about to do a 7-part video series on the Confessions by a professor from the University of Dallas who studies this. So,
Take it.
yeah. Go ahead and hang up and call us back, Evan. And so those who are interested, if you become a patron over at patreon.com/MattFrad, you help. And you get to learn all about the confessions, so that'll be cool. All right, there he is. There's the man himself.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so is there anything else you want to say before we start taking questions? Because I presume that as we take questions, you can kind of flesh out your story a little more, but if you'd like to kind of say more, just sort of wrap this up, how you came into the church, maybe do that first, and then we'll start taking questions.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll say is, so I went and got this spiritual director, and I was like, I went and I emailed the guy. He said, talk to this priest. I emailed him, and that priest said no, but check out this priest. So I went to this priest, and I went to him, and I was like, so I think that the Catholic Church is true, because when I went to my professor, I was very convinced that either the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church was true, because this idea of historical pedagogy was very prominent in my mind, coming from the Buddhist tradition, where there's traditions of monks who teach other monks. So that was very prominent for me. And so I went to him, and so I went with Catholicism, actually out of American pragmatism, to be completely honest, initially. But then whenever I went to this priest, he catechized me, basically, because I had virtually forgotten anything that I had been taught as a child already, because none of it ever really stuck. And so he was like, yeah, you actually have to go to church on Sundays. You have to do these things and all of that. And it was really profound. And he taught me the rosary, which absolutely changed my life. Mary catechized me. I firmly believe that in the rosary. Reflecting on the mysteries of Jesus is what really helped me get it. And so I read the Gospels for the first time, was utterly convicted of the person of Jesus Christ, who just jumps off of the page when you're coming in honest.
Had you had much familiarity with the Gospels prior to this time?
No, I think I would say that I think I used to lie and say that I knew everything about the Bible, but I hadn't. I really knew nothing about the Gospels besides what I had heard at church, and I wasn't paying attention.
And I forget, did you say you were baptized as a kid?
I was. So I was
Okay.
baptized and confirmed. But whenever but whether whether I should have or not was another thing entirely. But I think it was a good thing. God blessed me in those things still. So it was easy to come into the church because I didn't have to go through RCIA. I just had to prove. It was like coming back to something I never knew, basically, and knew in a deep way. And I remember that was my first time doing Eucharistic adoration was after one of those spiritual directions where I went to confession and I said like everything I'd ever done in my life. And I felt this palpable weight just get lifted off of my chest. And he went and told me to go to the adoration chapel. And I was sitting in front of the real presence. And I was struck, so deeply struck in my heart by the beauty of the Savior on the altar. I cried, and I wasn't much of a crier. Irish Catholic here, so
Can I interject to just share a really powerful story that happened with me? I used to do a lot of work in the anti-pornography movement, and when I was living in Ireland, I actually flew out an ex-porn star to Dublin, and I interviewed her in the jazz club about the reality of being a porn performer. Right. So after this woman got out of the porn industry, she came to Jesus Christ. Her life changed. So she was an evangelical Protestant, and so she had no experience of Eucharistic adoration. But on our way down to Dublin to do this big talk in the jazz club, right, we stopped at a little convent of the Missionaries of Charity. And we went and knocked on the door. A sister came out and said, "We're all in adoration. Feel free to come around the side and pray." And so we all came in and we just sort of sat down there. The sisters are there praying Eucharist up the front. And we were there maybe 10, 15 minutes. And then, I think one of the sisters ushered us to go back around so that she could chat with us. And this lady, her name was April Garris, she looked at me and she said, "Did you feel the presence of God in there?" Now I was like, well, not really. I mean, for me, unfortunately, things can become habit. I mean, I understand the presence of God was there, but my point was her experience sounds a lot like what your experience was. So yeah, continue.
Yes. I actually have a very powerful story about Eucharistic adoration in Ireland whenever I went there for a mission trip with Focus. But I won't share it now. But yeah, I went and had that amazing experience. And so it was I was very involved on my college campus. I was very well known. I was in a fraternity. I was in the student government stuff and all these things. And so my conversion was kind of a big deal because it was almost like a 180 flip. For a lot of people's brains. And so the Catholic students on that campus heard about it, and they actually found me on campus and invited me to come and start hanging out with them, going to Mass and all these things. And so they really helped walk with me and truly accompany me deeply into my faith. And my senior year of college, I at this point in time, so they helped accompany me, and in my personal studies, I am literally all I did was, I think, in my free time was listen to Catholic Answers, read Catholic Answers books, and listen to Matt Fradd, Pints of kind of stuff. No joke. Wow. And I think because I just wanted to know the answers to things. And I mean, because your whole worldview changes when you accept that Jesus is God and your Lord and Savior, that he established a church and all these things, everything changes. And so I was really in it. And then Focus Missionaries came my senior year and just absolutely changed my life and taught me what it meant to not just be a son of God, but what it meant to be called into a vocation, a mission, a calling, that God had a purpose, a profound purpose for my life. And so then now we can go into the questions. But I wanted to just get to that point.
So when were you brought back into the church then? I mean, I know you were baptized and confirmed, but when was it? When you were going through this class in college, when did you start wearing that honking crucifix around your neck? Maybe that gets to the same answer.
I'd say my sophomore year.
And how long ago was that?
That would have been about 4 years ago, I think. 4 years ago now.
Glory to Jesus Christ. One final question, and then we're going to start taking questions. So to all of you watching right now, if you could do us a favor, give us a thumbs up and share this video, because making Google evangelize is just a fun thing to do. So click that share button, put it on Facebook, Twitter, wherever else, and give us a thumbs up. It does support the channel, and then we'll take your questions here in a moment. But one final question, that is, obviously when you became a Christian, you had to reject many tenets of Buddhism. But what is it that from Buddhism that you think you learnt? Or is there anything that has sort of stuck with you?
Yeah. I think one of the most profound things about Buddhism that I learned, and I mean, yeah, of course, because realistically speaking, you're going to have to, things are, they are different religions, so they don't teach the same things. But I think in regards to, man, that's a great question. In regards
to... Let me just say why I'm asking it, because I think there's going to be some people who don't understand it, right? Religious indifferentism is false. Religious indifferentism is the idea that basically all religions are equal, right? They're not. We must be Christians. We must be Catholics, right? We won't be saved except through Christ and his church. But so that's an error on one end. On the other end of the spectrum is the idea that we cannot learn truth from anybody else or any other group, and that's also something we don't want to fall into. I mean, even like my Muslim friends, right? I do not think that Muhammad was a prophet. But I think that it contains some truths, and I think I can look at my Muslim friends and see their commitment to prayer. They offer a prayer as soon as they wake up, for example, and I could see that kind of dedication. Like, yeah, wow, that's really impressive, and I can learn from that. And still, at the same time, see that Muhammad wasn't a prophet and that Islam is a false religion. And so that's the kind of we don't want to kind of fall into one of those traps. You know what I mean? So when I say like, what did you learn from Buddhism? Obviously, it's not going to be something that's not within Catholicism, but maybe there's an emphasis that you saw that stuck with you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think one of the major emphases that I would say would be there was an intensive amount of discipline for virtue within Buddhism. This idea that like I actually have a role to play, but I'm not everything. And there was almost like a balance between like a pure stoicism or something where like the Stoics basically you're almost supposed to be an automaton, right? I mean, what is the story about like Epictetus? Like, you're gonna break my arm now. Oh, you have broken my arm, and he's not supposed to react at all or something like that, right? But I think within Buddhism there's an intensive amount of discipline to virtue there, and especially discipline towards the mind. Now, I don't think it's I think the proper orientation of contemplation is to contemplate divine truths, and natural truths in as much as they reflect divine truths. But I think that's something that's very commendable about the Buddhist is a lot of deep practice. And also most Buddhists are oriented towards a deep understanding of compassion, of the importance of life, the importance of taking care of people and treating life with respect, that can kind of become devoid within a lot of Christians can almost in a sense, and I'm not trying to pit it against Christianity, but a lot of people who grow up in the Western culture can almost lose this respect for life, in a sense of that, like there's not this realization of the profound dignity of every single person. Now, the foundation of that in Buddhism is a little confusing, metaphysically speaking, but I noticed in practice it was definitely there. And I think that those are some things that I would definitely deeply commend about and praise. I mean, maybe even I would say praise.
Yep, beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. Okay, so to all of y'all watching in YouTube land, thank you so much for being here. We're going to take some questions right now, and feel free to send them. Ask a question to Evan. I'll throw it up on the screen. Evan, it looks like you bloody froze again. No, you didn't. You were just shutting your eyes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, look, no, you didn't freeze. I just thought you froze. All right, so if y'all want to ask a question, we'll throw that up on the screen, get Evan to answer it. Do us a favor while you're watching, hit that thumbs up icon, because it actually does help spread the video, and that would be great because, as I say earlier, it's good to have Google help us understand Christianity a bit better. I'm not sure if they're super committed to that. All right, send us your questions. Let's do it. Here we go. Okay, this person, Absurd Scandal, says, is it true that Buddhism essentially denies formal parts and its doctrines of no self are basically identifying God as the formal identity of everything? Pretty intense question.
So Did you get that? Is he talking about mereological nihilism?
He might be.
When I was practicing Buddhist, I basically did.
Explain what that means for those who don't know. Well, it's basically the idea that there are no natures, right?
Yeah. I think that would be safe to say, at least within the type of Buddhism that I was practicing.
Okay.
That was a huge thing for me, actually. Act impotency, and natures. That was a big thing that caused a shift of thinking in my brain, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. Joseph Lee says, good evening from Singapore, Matt and Evan. I come from a country of 40% Buddhists. Most believe that as long as you do good acts, it's enough. No savior needed. Any tips on evangelizing the culture?
Yeah, it's really intriguing because Buddhism has almost a soteriological perspective about salvation, but there's almost this understanding. It's more similar to like Platonism in that like you're not like necessarily just screwed if you don't get it right this go around, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like in tips for evangelizing, I don't want to sound like a broken record or anything, but people don't. You need to, one, study your faith very well and know what you believe. And two, be fascinated with Jesus and fascinated with the people that you want to know Jesus. So make sure that when you're talking with people that they feel known, that they feel loved, that they feel cared for. And I don't mean that in like tolerate things that, but like no one will listen to you if you just come and you just start slamming people with arguments all the time. Like I mean, and so
I love
one
that.
of the, yeah,
That's beautiful.
that's
Be
what I was
fascinated with Jesus. Be fascinated with those that you're evangelizing. That's really beautiful. Okay, so Shayo says, hey, so I'm also a practicing Buddhist and wanted to know whether you had any, okay, I don't know what this means, some Adi Satori experiences and how they compare to your experiences as a Christian. Do you know what those words are? SAMADHI and SATORI experiences? I guess he's talking about, did you have any, maybe he's asking you, did you have any kind of sort of what felt like transcendent experiences in your meditation as a Buddhist and how they compared to your experience as a Christian?
Yeah,
Forgive me if that's not exactly what he's asking.
I'll answer your question because I'm having a really hard time spelling in my head or
Yeah.
remembering the term, but I'll answer your question. I did believe that I did have some transcendental experiences within Buddhism, but I think that in like instances in meditation or anything, but they weren't like I didn't feel like I had like, I don't know, achieved enlightenment or something like that. But what I did feel like was that I felt like there was like just a very profound self-awareness, that where everything felt very crystal clear. In Buddhism, I had a lot of those. And I've had a lot of experiences that I wouldn't necessarily consider transcendental within Christianity or Catholicism, but those experiences were actually where I felt like I was in very profound, deep communion with God. And the only way that I could really express that was I felt more loved, more known, more cared about, more sustained, more upheld than I ever had in my entire life. And I felt personally completely known and received in a way that was just like, the best way to describe it would be either like how spouses know each other in the intimacy of marriage or how a father knows his son.
Okay.
I would say.
That's beautiful. Got a question here for me. John Rico Bayot says, hi, Matt. Why do you think God is personal? How do you rule out pantheistic God? Thanks. So the reason I think God is personal and tri-personal at that is that God has revealed himself to us, and things that aren't personal can't do that. The only way we can do theology is if divine revelation is a thing. If divine revelation isn't a thing, you can't do theology. You can do philosophy and come to know that God exists or not. Aquinas says you don't need God's revelation to know that God exists, but in order to know anything about God, God must reveal himself to us. God is infinitely beyond us. We have no access to him, his person, the mystery of him, unless he should reveal that to us. And since he has, I believe God is personal, tri-personal, and I also reject pantheism. Veronica says, do you miss anything about Buddhism?
Mostly aesthetic things. I really liked the temple grounds and the beauty of it. Coming into, I live in America. A lot of the churches were built after the 60s, and they're not the most beautiful places.
No.
So I'd say that there was a lot of profound, and it was a peaceful beauty. There was a simplicity. I like the architecture, but that's not necessarily a Buddhist thing. I'd say one of the things that I missed within Buddhism was, I don't know. It was a good time in my life. It was very peaceful. I wouldn't say I particularly actually miss it. Like, I don't desire to go back at all. I find everything that I found within Buddhism still within Catholicism, in a more personal, more full way, I guess you could say. So,
okay. Let's see here. Mitchell Scott says, how does Buddhism address the origins of man and our universe? A fundamental question of life is, where did I come from? Did they have a satisfying and coherent answer to this? Great question, Mitchell.
As far as I'm aware, Buddha doesn't really actually talk about this that much. This is what would be one of those questions that Buddha thinks is like a sideline question. So like it gets you distracted from the real purpose of virtue, which is actually very insightful in a lot of ways. Because if you don't have revelation, like what Matt was talking about, if you don't have revelation in any capacity, at best what you have about the origins of human life is scientific theories that you can extrapolate from the amount of data that you have. And if you do have revelation, you can base it off of the theological and philosophical truths, but it will always end up being underdetermined, the origins of human life. So I think Buddha would have thought that would have been a distracting question, so to speak. Like it would have distracted you from the main point, which is actually getting enlightened now, becoming virtuous now, basically.
Okay. Mary Carl says, I'm an ex-Buddhist too. Would you say, gosh, I'm really, I'm not doing this to look like a hipster. I actually need it. Would you say the contradictory doctrines and views within Buddhist sects present an argument against Buddhism?
I'm sure it could. I'm sure it could. I would have to know what you're necessarily referring to, because I'd be hesitant about that only in the sense of saying, say you're a Christian and somebody says, well, could you say the fact that there's so many denominations and they believe different theological truths that contradict themselves disproves Christianity? And I would say, well, actually, not out of logical necessity. It might give you some information that makes you say, okay, I have to look into this a little bit more. Maybe there's only one group that's right, which would actually be the case in regards to most things. Like there can't be contradictory statements, can both be true. The principle of non-contradiction always stands. So I wouldn't say that would necessarily be an argument against Buddhism, unless you think that every single Buddhist denomination has contradictory statements within it. If we're using denomination as a whole, which we wouldn't really use that anyway. So sect is the proper word. But
that's a really good point. I mean, just because Christian denominations have conflicting beliefs doesn't show that they're all false. It might show that one of them is. But if Catholicism was to contain within itself conflicting beliefs, that could be used as an argument against Catholicism. Gabe Carroll says, can a Catholic practice mindfulness meditation techniques, not as an alternative spiritual practice, but rather like a fitness regime for the mind?
That's a really good question.
I think so.
I'm not familiar with what mindfulness like within Catholicism is. Dan Burke, I think, talks about this a little bit. He runs like the Avila Institute. I read a book about his on spiritual warfare. I think he was opposed to it. I think there's certain things about mindfulness that unless you can directly show me that like the intention of mindfulness is to not realize the reality of your nature and to deny yourself or something, well then I don't necessarily see the problem. But I'm not an authority on this, so I don't feel comfortable giving a yay or nay there.
That's fair enough. That's a really humble answer. I think the first thing we always have to do is to say, what do you mean? What do you mean by mindfulness, right? Because suppose someone was to say, well, by mindfulness, I mean being more present. Well, then what you're asking is it against Catholicism to try and be more present, which is a ridiculous question, of course. How could it possibly be? So I think that's the first thing we have to do. I think the other thing like we should be aware of is that whenever like our secular society picks up a particular term and runs with it, there can sometimes be a sort of knee-jerk reaction to that thing, right? Well, that thing must be bad, as opposed to kind of doing the hard work of taking a look at it and then being nuanced in our response to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, golly, man, so many questions. Here we go. This is a good one. Hans, I'm not going to try and say his last name, says, what does Buddha teach on love? Is there any familiar connections between Christianity and Buddhism in that regard?
Kind of. A little bit.
What does he have to say on love?
So this is kind of like, okay, what do we mean by love? I guess would be like an important distinction. So are we going to do like the classic C.S. Lewis break down love into the four Greek or whatever? And because Buddhism is originally, the original documents are in Sanskrit. And so I don't actually properly understand the etymological origins of what the word love might mean within that context. But what I will say is, so I'm going to humbly say, I can't give you a full answer on this, but I can give you a little one, which will be Buddha is very big on this idea of selfless compassion, basically, which we would actually probably find very similar to agape love. Within the Christian tradition, I would say. So this idea that like you very much have to get outside of yourself and be willing to even sacrifice yourself to help other people on the path to enlightenment. And that sounds very similar to Christian love. But Christians understand love as God is love. So there's a very relational and profoundly intimate connotation within Christianity that I don't necessarily think is present in Buddhism.
Before I ask this next question from Joe, and maybe you've addressed this, but Catholicism has an authority, right? It has a catechism which you can read and then know what the Catholic Church teaches. Yeah. I know there are different strands of Buddhism, but is there any sort of kind of living authority to interpret the texts of Buddha and these other works?
None in the capacity of none to the extent of the magisterium or the papacy or something like that. But there is, especially within Theravadan Buddhism and the Dalai Lama, for example, within the branch of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism that he's in, he would be considered an authority. And there would be these, so there are the idea of authorities is deeply present in Buddhism, but none to the universal extent that is within Catholicism. So how authority would work within Buddhism is each of there's people who are trained underneath others, right?
Okay.
So instead of an idea of an apostolic succession where I actually have the say, in Buddhism it's he was trained by this monk who was trained by this monk who was trained by this monk, and they trace their lineages back, and through that training they say, well, I have an authority to help teach you in this capacity there. So it's more along the lines of trying to find an unadulterated chain of people that are practicing what you think is the most authentic type of Buddhism, so to speak. But I don't think so. There are texts that are upheld, but none to the capacity of a catechism or something like that.
Okay, so with that in mind, here's Joe's question: is Buddhism compatible with Christianity? Can you see both Christian? Can you be both Christian and follow Buddhist practices? So in other words, presumably hardcore types of Buddhism is totally not compatible with Christianity. Yeah. But if there isn't kind of an interpreter to sort of say this is what you must believe when you read, is there any way you can reconcile Buddhism and Christianity? Can someone be a Christian Buddhist or no?
I mean, I think no. Mostly what I would ask is, well, what is the intention of calling yourself a Christian Buddhist besides confusing people with terms? Because if you believe in the Catholic truth, you're a Christian. And if you are wanting to cut Buddhism, the thing is this is one of the things that I had too, because for a while I wanted to actually call myself a Christian Buddhist whenever I initially had this conversion, because I had seen so much good within Buddhism in regards to the natural law and all these things. But then I realized that I just wasn't personally being intellectually honest when I said that, because truth be told, I had a lot of similar things, a lot of common ground with Buddhists on natural issues, but when it came to my religious beliefs, we were just not on the same page. And so it would have been dishonest for me to call myself a Christian Buddhist, because that would confuse people. Because usually when you say Buddhist, you believe in something like enlightenment or all these sorts of things. And that is not something you can believe in and be a Catholic, basically, is what I would say. I would say, just pray, do some real prayer and soul searching in regards to that. But just assessing, am I being intellectually honest? Am I grasping at this? That's another great thing about Buddhism. Grasping, the idea of grasping. Am I grasping at this term? Why do I want this additional label here? That would be important.
That's good, right? Because Catholicism is the fullness of what God wants for us.
Yeah.
That does not mean we cannot learn from pagans like Aristotle or people.
Or Cicero.
or Cicero, yep, or even Christopher Hitchens. Like, we can learn from each other. We can learn from Buddha as well. But I suppose I would say, if you are reading Christopher Hitchens, you're putting your faith in jeopardy. And if you're reading the works of Buddha, there's a possibility that you're doing that too.
Yeah, possible for sure.
Here's what Thomas Boog asks, and I'm not sure if you've read much of Thomas Merton, but he said, did Thomas Merton go too far with his meditations?
I actually have read a decent amount of Thomas Merton. I actually read him when I was Buddhist, a little bit.
Okay.
And I don't want to. I don't know. I think he probably did go too far.
Feel free. Yeah, give us your raw interpretation. It's all right.
I think he probably did go too far. I absolutely pray for the man. I think he was a very holy and great spiritual writer. I mean, I read Power of Silence.
Seven-Story Mansion was excellent.
Yeah. He quotes him in, like, he's quoted in tons of things. He's prolific. He's written some very beautiful things. He was a very authentic Trappist. But I think he probably did go too far, because he was trying very hard to view like Zen Buddhism as being not really a religion, but being like this philosophical system all about like natural perfection and sort of things. This is my interpretation of him. I don't want to blackball him by any means, but I think he probably did go too far, in the sense of I think he probably lost his way a little bit. But he's much more intelligent than me. Much more intelligent than me, was in a much more deep practice of the religious life. So I don't know. Maybe there's something in his writings that I'm missing, but I would not recommend his writings, his later writings to people. I wouldn't.
Yeah, I would say, I would probably agree with that, right? I would say Seven-Story Mountain is a classic. It's
absolutely
incredible. So beautifully written. Okay, here's another question from John Rico. He says, hi, Matt and Evan. How does Buddhism view morality? Also, what are their comments on relativism, if any?
I would say that there's definitely an understanding of like a natural morality within Buddhism, but the stakes are a little different, because there's they don't have the same concept of like, well, this is the only life you got, right? So like we think like that this is it, and and once you die, like, there is an eternal fate for your soul, but in the sense of it's the same life. You're not like reborn into heaven or something like that. Like it's a resurrection. So of this body. And so like within Buddhism, I would say that there is actually a stance on morality there. Like when I was a Buddhist, I thought abortion was wrong. Which that's not trying to say it as a hot take or something, but that was because of like, there was this understanding that like it was wrong to hurt other people. And there was this profound view of like, to do evil to another, there was an idea of evil, and to do that to another person intentionally was bad. Like it was wrong, and it actually affected the entire world in a negative way.
Were you a vegan during this time, along those lines?
I really was trying. That was actually a big philosophical conundrum for me. Was it okay for me to kill animals? Well, they're already going to die, blah, blah, blah. They're already dead.
What about the idea of reincarnation, though? Is that something you held to?
Not in the normal Hindu sense.
Okay.
I held to this idea of rebirth, but I viewed it in on more spiritual lines. So I believed in basically like almost like a multiverse, like multiple realities and stuff. And like this was like one of the best realities possible, is this one. But there was also ones that were a little bit more helly, a little bit more heavenly, like those sorts of things. And those were the places that you could be reborn into, so to speak.
Fair enough.
I did think that the animals, you could be reborn, but I didn't quite understand it. It always was a little confusing to me. That aspect of it was.
Well, this next question comes from Godnod, and again, I would just recommend people check out her channel. It's really fantastic. She's doing great work. Just click her name there, go through, subscribe. She says, "Have any of your Buddhist friends converted? Did you keep in touch with people from when you were a Buddhist, and did you help them see the truth of Christianity?"
So sadly, I can say that I was not St. Augustine. So everyone that I knew didn't convert anytime I changed my beliefs. I do keep in touch with some of my friends that we were practicing together, but none of them have converted. They've doubled down, I would say, more so than converted. definitely still good friends. We still deeply love each other. We still can get a pint or something like that, and everything's all good and jolly. But I would say, yeah, none of them have converted. I mean, I keep in touch. So my conversion was a distinctly personal thing.
Yeah, yeah. And is there the sort of desire to convert people to Buddhism as there is in Christianity?
There can be. I think it's more so along the lines of like kind of like the same, like if you were, I don't, not like, so not like the four horsemen atheist, but more so like, you know how generally speaking, if you believe something and you think it's true, you desire other people
That's
to
right.
believe in the same thing. And so
Yeah.
I'd say that I had that.
Yeah.
I wasn't too concerned about it because I just thought to myself, well, they're living a pretty good life, so they'll probably be reborn in a place where they'll be helped out more so. So I didn't have like the same fervor that I have now within Christianity.
Okay.
So.
Big thanks to Capturing Christianity. Did you watch some of the stuff that we did?
Oh yeah,
with Cameron Batuzzi. Did you
Of
see me?
course.
Did you see me like destroy him in the debate we did on community? Because he's here. He's watching right now.
On
so
the
I thought
Eucharist? Oh, I thought you just absolutely demolished
So-
him. No,
I'm just being
I
funny.
thought that was a great discussion. That was a really beautiful discussion. I love
Yeah.
Cam's stuff. I subscribe to him. I watch his videos too.
Good. Yeah,
I
he's
think
doing
great.
awesome work. Beautiful family, great guy. For those who didn't catch the beginning of the show, Cameron Batuzzi and I are going to be starting a YouTube channel called Cam and Matt React, where we just react to crap constantly, and that's it. So
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, after this, I'll be sure to throw up throw up a link to that. But you know, it's funny that I should say that, right? Because like I'm partly joking, right? And I'm like, I destroyed Cameron. Like I'm saying that in a funny way, and I think I say that in a funny way because I feel like YouTube has a really when I say YouTube, I mean people who comment in YouTube com boxes have a really weird and false thoughts when it comes to how do I convert people. You know, I'll just yell at them and call them a heretic. That'll help. You know,
I know, right?
it's never worked for me.
No, I've had a lot of friends who have converted, not from Buddhism, but a lot of friends who have converted. I had the privilege of sponsoring some people into the church and things like that, and I've witnessed many conversions and very beautiful things. But I never won any of those by just yelling at somebody and calling them a heretic.
Yeah.
I did win those by being intellectually honest in the sense of like I was very honest about what I believed. I would point out why I thought that those things were wrong, and we were just friends. We were deep, profound. We had a very authentic friendship, and I was open towards inviting people into an intimate relationship, not only with myself but with my beloved, my God, Jesus Christ. So
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Capturing Christianity just wrote back and said he got decimated. Just for everybody who's out there, Cameron and I are doing monthly debates on things that divide Protestants and Catholics. So if you want to support me for $10 a month on Patreon or Cameron, either way, you get access to these monthly debates that we're doing. So this is what we're referring to if people are, totally lost. But thanks for being here, Cameron. God bless you. All right. Oh, yeah. Veronica wants to know what my double date was like. So Cameron and Brittany from Houston came and visited my wife and I, and we just went downtown, got some drinks, hung out. So it was lovely. Thank you for asking. Okay. Leonardo says to Evan, what advice? Here we are. What advice would you have for Christians who are led by the Spirit to preach to a Buddhist if we are trying to convert them? Any kind of questions?
So redirect back to the question of the same person who lives in a predominantly Buddhist country. I would say when you are talking to somebody, like you have to, I mean, so I am a missionary. Like, I mean, I like that, maybe that should be something that's said. So like, I spend my entire life encountering people, inviting them into a relationship with Jesus and watching the impact that can happen there and all these things. And so I would say the same advice that I would say with anybody, which would be you have to be fascinated with Jesus Christ, know your own faith, be fascinated with them. So maybe learn a little bit more about Buddhism than you know, study it a little bit, see what's going on there, have a very charitable view. You think to yourself, these people are people who are in a different religious tradition than you. This is their home. This is their culture. This is where they are operating in their entire worldview. So be fascinated with them and understand maybe where you have common ground, but also understand the differences. And you have to go in there and make sure that people feel completely known, loved, cared for. Because what you're doing when you're evangelizing to people is you want people to have an encounter with the living God, Jesus Christ, who loves them way more than you do, cares about them way more than you do, and knows them way better than you do. And so you have to come in with this deep perspective of like, yeah, there's truth here, but there's also a profound relationship, a personal encounter that happens whenever you're evangelizing. And I mean, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's really great. Thanks for that. That's super important. I appreciate you emphasizing that. Here's a question from Ocean Deep 2. He says, who are the best and serious Buddhist philosophers out there?
Oh, that's interesting.
Maybe you've lost touch of that since you've converted, but I mean, was that a thing? Were there people that were highly respected, not just because of their stage of enlightenment or some such, but because of how they explicated, Buddhism?
I would say that I've lost touch with it, and also my philosophical education was primary source based. So I was mostly reading like actual documents from like the out of the horse's mouth. So like instead of reading modern day Augustinian scholars, I was reading Augustine. And so similarly with Buddhism, like I was reading actual Buddhist text. Nagarjuna is pretty profound. His writings are. I really liked him, and I think the translations for a lot of the Buddhist texts that I would read were translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi, I believe. But I'm not in on the contemporary philosophical Buddhist scene that much. I would even say besides who I know from my friends who are philosophy professors, the sources and the articles that they send me, I don't keep up too much with the contemporary philosophical scene.
Yeah, thank you. Thug Rose says, what would you say to people who say Christianity was significantly influenced by Buddhism?
Well,
do people say that?
Yeah, people definitely do say that. So there's this idea. I think that there actually might be a case that the Greeks were, mostly because of the Silk Road and the form of travel and stuff like that. There's actually, with some current, more modern archaeological discoveries and stuff, there seems to have been much earlier encounters between Eastern and Western and Asian cultures than we initially perceived, and especially since Buddhism originated in India and actually did take on a very big historical point. So I think the Greeks could have potentially been influenced by Buddhism in some capacity. Now, all of that is utterly and absolutely underdetermined. What I would say about Jesus is I have a very hard time thinking that Christians were influenced by Buddhism, because Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism. And so most Christians were Jews or Gentiles living in pagan Rome. And I think that the idea that they would have just had a normal relationship with Buddhism just seems to be almost historically absurd to me with what we currently know. So I think probably very little. But Jesus was God, so I mean, he definitely knew everything that the Buddha knew.
Nice. And of course, this cuts both ways, right? Buddhism, people in the East could have been influenced by Plato.
Absolutely.
I tell you what, if I didn't believe in Jesus Christ, there were times when I was reading Socrates and I thought, he'll do. I'll follow this guy. You know.
Oh, amen. Oh, yeah. I mean, dude, Socrates meets Jesus.
Hey, there you go.
Socrates, he's incredible.
I would say to people out there, if you haven't read Socrates, sometimes these big names kind of intimidate people. I would say pick up the Apology. The Apology is Socrates' speech right before he was condemned to death, and it's a beautiful speech and easy to follow, and it'll help kind of get you interested in reading more of Plato.
Yes, Socrates is my absolute favorite pagan philosopher. He's amazing. I mean, he's just absolutely stellar.
There is a Dominican church in New York City that I was at a couple of years ago that has a stained glass window of Aristotle.
Yeah, I've seen some iconography.
And there's a green icon. There's a green icon.
This idea that he was like as close as you could be using non-revelatory means, right? Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah,
I hope he's there.
Dante has him at the top of hell, which was his tip of the hat. Okay, all right. This is really good. Okay, here's a question from Taylor Huber. How is sanctification different than enlightenment?
Oh, I mean, wow. Incredibly so, I would say. Enlightenment seems to be still almost a natural thing that is acquired like through almost a natural means, I would say. Now, it has a very supernatural connotation because it's almost like transcending the natural. But sanctification is an incredibly complex theological topic that is basically the root of the Protestant Reformation. So, I mean, sanctification is, I mean, I'm very familiar with it, but I'm trying to think of a good way to.
Well, one of the ways, like in the East, we talk about sanctification is this idea of theosis, deification, right? The idea that we participate in God's life, that this is something we receive from Him, that holiness is something He does within us. As opposed to perhaps something that we achieve by our own efforts.
Yeah, so maybe in if I was going to grossly oversimplify it, if the viewpoint is like, if you're thinking of yourself as enlightenment as being almost like, well, you become like a little God, and within Christianity, it's like there's such a deep, intimate participation that it's almost like you became God. But in a sense, there's this deification, which is a beautiful theological concept that everyone should look into. You should do an episode on that, Matt, for sure.
What on theosis?
Yeah, theosis.
Already done.
Sure.
Already
really?
done. We did a whole episode with a Dominican priest who celebrates.
Gregory Pine, or
no, Father Brandt. He celebrates the Divine Liturgy as well. So he's
God.
by ritual. Yeah. So you go to pintswithaquinas.com, type in.
Watch that. Because that's sanctification in its most intimate sense. Now, in Buddhism, there is this idea that you become Buddha, right? So it's actually there's a very similar thing going on here that, in a sense, you want to, but I'd say it's almost more similar to like taking on an archetype than what it is in Christianity. Whereas like it's almost like you are also reaching the perfection of the archetype of Buddha. Now, I'm using a lot of Western terms to try and convey some Buddhist ideas, but I mean, yeah. I know that's not a satisfactory answer probably, but I would say this.
Yeah.
Study enlightenment more intimately within the Theravada and the Mahayana and the Zen traditions. Look into it if you really want to out of genuine curiosity. And if you know the idea of sanctification within Christianity well, or you just go to this Pints with Aquinas episode and you watch that and compare it for yourself. Like, don't just see like really look into it and see what the difference is.
Here's a question that you might be able to respond to quite quickly. I'm not sure if you'll remember this, but he says, what did Evan mean by saying that the Buddhist basis for the appreciation of life, of living creatures, is shaky? Do you remember saying that?
Oh, I meant, so I was talking about the metaphysics, right? So without having this understanding of like basically like what's the best way to say it? I meant that it was yeah. So
is the idea that there's sort of no ontological basis for the belief that life has value?
The way that I perceived it was that I basically didn't pick up on there being this ontological basis, mostly because I was basically a mereological nihilist. So I really thought morality was mostly like just like a cultural thing that developed for the sake of all these things. So I didn't have like the strongest grasp of why life was sacred. I just knew it was because the Buddha was very big on emphasizing.
But you might not be able to give a philosophical argument for it.
No, I wasn't able to because of the metaphysical commitments that I had built up within it. Now, I don't think those are necessitated within Buddhism, and I think that there are Buddhists with probably very good reasons for protecting and sanctification of life and these sorts of things. But I'm going to plead ignorance on that and just admit that I'm ignorant there.
Portia Conant, I think I got her last name right, says, just discovered this podcast. Well, thank you so much, Portia. It's lovely to have you. If you wouldn't mind clicking subscribe and that bell button, This forces Google to tell you whenever we put out a new episode about our blessed Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. She says, watching this is so encouraging to my heart. Thank you, guys. So that's beautiful.
Oh, praise God.
Man, this is fun. You probably need to go. What are you doing today? Just this?
I actually, no, I'm meeting up with two of my really good philosophy buddies, but
Nice,
I'm down to stay on for a little. Yeah, we can answer some more questions.
Let's do a few more. What do we do? Like 5 more or so.
Sure.
Kyle Barrington says, Matt Frad, your beard is looking real Eastern. Thank you. He says, next step, convert to Orthodoxy. Haha. No. Eastern Catholic. I'm actually filling out the paperwork right now to actually change canonical rites, to change churches.
Oh, praise God.
So that's orthodox enough for me. Orthodox in communion with Rome. Anyways, how has the Catholic Church, he says, done in reaching Buddhists worldwide? What evangelistic struggles are there? That's a really good question, because we do talk about sort of evangelizing Muslims, evangelizing atheists, evangelizing Seventh-day Adventists or Mormons. But do we talk a lot about evangelizing Buddhists? And is this perhaps something that you might be being called to, Evan? If there's not a significant kind of movement out there or a channel out there that helps Catholics understand Buddhist teaching and how they might reach out and invite them into Christianity, is that something you're aware of? And it seems like that's a pretty big gap if there's not.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm not too familiar with any of like Vatican efforts or something like that. I know that there's interreligious dialogue things that have been set up. I think that for the most part, one of the biggest things that I think is important in doing this type of dialogue is an understanding of the tradition, but also having an understanding of the tradition, the Buddhist tradition, but not being scared to admit that you believe that Christianity and Catholicism is true, and that you do want to have a dialogue for the sake of discovering truth and the proper way to live, but it's not mean to say that I don't believe the same thing that Buddhists believe. So one of the worst things that you can do is develop this indifferentist mindset towards other religions. Well, it's basically okay. But no, like people are actually worth the conversation. Just because these people...
Oh, what a line.
Yeah,
you should tweet that, man. That's a bumper sticker.
You
people are worth
that.
the conversation. Beautiful.
You can tweet that. I don't know. I that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, to give people a little bit of a voice, a friendly discussion, talking about these sorts of things. I think it'd be great if more apologists, Catholic Answers, people like you, Matt, other people could get in dialogue with maybe some prominent voices. I'm not familiar with who they are, but I think the best thing for evangelization is for each Catholic bishop to lay person to realize that you individually have a responsibility to love profoundly and share your faith with everyone. Like in the sense of not like knocking on everyone's door. Have you heard about Jesus? But in the sense of you have relationships in a sphere of influence that is around you, that God has blessed you with, and that you should share your whole self, your very life with them. And your very life should be based upon Christ Jesus if you're a Catholic. And so through that fascination with Jesus and fascination with the other, and willing to be honest about where you're ignorant, willing to be open to learning about others and all these sorts of things, I think evangelization could be much more prominent, like a little way of evangelization built through profound relationships with others and sharing, rather than maybe not making another national organization that is meant to do outreach. I think it's much more profound and useful for us, the people here listening to this podcast, to do this.
Another thing I think that's so important is that we ask ourselves honestly, what is it that is so attractive about Buddhism? When I see photos of it, there is something that's good and true and beautiful, at least as I perceive it. What is it? And I think we've touched upon that earlier on in the show, this idea that we are drawn to the transcendent. We are drawn to the other. We do not want to go to a worship service where I act and everybody around me acts the same way they act in 7-Eleven or in an airport. We want to go somewhere where we can genuinely kiss the earth and encounter what St. John of the Cross calls, I know not what, his name for God, which is beautiful. We want that so desperately. And I think this is probably what has attracted you, Evan, to attend the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite. It's what's I'll let you speak for yourself in a second here. But what's led me to attend the Byzantine liturgy is I desire, I'm something of a parish orphan where I long for that sort of reverence. And so, us kind of reclaiming what St. Teresa of Avila has talked about, Maximus the Confessor has talked about.
Ooh.
Right, yeah?
Good reference. I love that.
Yeah, we really need to reclaim that, because just like I talk with Protestants and they say, when I became a Catholic, it wasn't like I was abandoning something that I had and didn't want to let go of. It was rather I was entering into something much larger. Yes. And we wouldn't want our Buddhist friends, to, just to be kind of accurate there, to feel like they're abandoning a good. And quite honestly, like if you're a Buddhist and you are practicing meditation and you go into like a random Catholic parish, it might feel that way. But if we are serious about contemplation, if we're serious about praying with the mind in the heart, as we learn in the East, if we're serious about, what does Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross call it, recollection, then we're inviting them into something larger, not narrower.
Yes.
What do you think?
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think Peter Kreeft is absolutely incredible, and he does this great thing of understanding that there are these he basically, I mean, these recognitions that like in a sense there are these types of people that you can look at that are prophets, in a sense of not like not like Old Testament prophets, but like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and maybe we can even say the Buddha, right? Because it's not even clear whether he even wanted to establish a religion. But like, we can say that, the Buddhist understanding that I'm enslaved when I'm in a state of grasping for something that I can't control is absolutely true and beautiful, to want to have a sense of freedom from that. Because, I mean, we recognize this within the Western tradition too. You can become enslaved to your passions and sort of these things, and that doesn't go away when you become a Catholic. It's not like all of a sudden you become a Catholic and passions are in perfect order. Now I never will become enslaved at grasping or anything like that again. But so there's these beautiful things about Buddhism that you don't have to let go of. Now, there are some things that you are going to have to let go of. If you believe in rebirth, if you believe in reincarnation, these sorts of, they're going to have to go. Real quick,
what's the difference between rebirth and reincarnation?
So reincarnation is kind of like this idea of like, it's like this, there's a cycle going on, right? And then at the end of the cycle, you basically like, you basically like enter into the one almost. Like, now that's more of a Hindu concept. Now these things all vary drastically within different sects, how they understand it. There's not as much unity as there is within Western traditions when it comes to these sorts of things.
Sure.
And rebirth, instead of, so there's still a cycle, but instead of kind of almost entering into God, you kind of like cease to exist entirely, basically. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate that distinction. Here's a question from Realmless. He says, "Hi Matt, I still want to know about the similarities between the Hesychasts and Indian spirituality."
Ooh, that's great.
In terms of form. Why don't I'll tee that up for you. So Hesychasm is a movement within the Orthodox Church and Eastern Christian circles, but though I think it originated on Mount Athos. St. Maximus the Confessor was a great proponent of it, the idea having to do with quietness. I believe this is what Hesychasm means. So I'm by no means an expert on this, and so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt, but when I pray the Jesus prayer, and there's an immediate sort of visual similarity there in that I'm praying with a prayer rope, and I'm using my breath to pray to kind of find this quiet. But you read any of the sort of Eastern fathers within Christianity, and they'll tell you that it's not about the mantra, right? It's not about like the specific words. It's not like you have to say, well, okay, I'm praying the Jesus prayer in English, but maybe I have to pray it in Russian or Greek or something. It's not like a secret formula. Rather, it's about praying from the heart, putting the mind in the heart, which is what Teresa calls recollection, and meaning what you're saying. So a lot of the Eastern Fathers will say, don't even bother using the breath, because it's not like a technique. It's a way of praying always. It's a way of desiring God continually. That's what it's about. And so I suspect that differs a great deal from sort of the spirituality that Evan's been talking about. But Evan, please speak to that.
Actually, I mean, this is super profound. This was the first type of Christian prayer that I really started engaging in, actually, because my mentor in college was Orthodox. And so he gave me all these copies of the Eastern Fathers and these sorts of things and everything like that. And that's the type of stuff that I was reading when I was coming into the church. And so it was actually very similar to what we were talking about. It wasn't like I was giving something up within the Buddhism, where I was actually, the mantra did matter. I was saying it in the Sanskrit and all these sorts of things and everything like that. And there was a sense of prayer, but it wasn't prayer in the way that we view prayer, I would say. Like, there was a personal aspect, but it's a lot different than how it is here. Like, but it was also incredibly similar. In that, like, when I was praying the Jesus prayer, I mean, before I got a rosary, I used my Buddhist prayer beads to pray the Jesus prayer.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Which, I mean, you can take that and leave it, whatever. But I was, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And it was an incredibly profound experience, because it was a deep idea of I had to really become centered on Christ. The center, I think, went from being on myself to being on Jesus. I think that was the transition.
I heard somebody say recently that we're talking not about centering prayer, but decentering prayer. Since in Christian prayer, you are no longer the center.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe a cute way of putting it, but still.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Oh, you okay? I can see you. You're still moving. You're looking good.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, promise.
Sweet. Praise God.
Okay, Portia says, can you give a quick explanation on why Christianity necessitates the exclusion of reincarnation as a possibility? Well, first thing that comes to my mind is that, well, Scripture does not teach it, but in fact, but of course, Scripture might not teach everything, and it could be true. And I would say it actually teaches positively against it. So in Hebrews 9:27, we read, "A man is appointed to die once, and after this, the judgment." And so because we believe that God's word is inerrant, that would be one argument, a positive one, against reincarnation. What do you think, Evan?
I think that's absolutely true. And Christianity positively teaches the resurrection of the body.
Yep.
This understanding that you were not, you came to be, you were made in your mother's womb, you lived this life, you died, you received judgment, and there will be a resurrection of this body. And so I would say that, I mean, yeah, it's scripturally speaking, you can't, it's irreconcilable with the New Testament. Maybe you could in the Old Testament. I believe that there's some Jewish people who do believe in reincarnation. I mean, because the Old Testament doesn't explicitly teach the resurrection. So I think you could say implicitly, but maybe. So?
Yeah, we certainly have. I mean, there's certainly sects of Judaism in the Old Testament that flat out deny it, right? Such as the Sadducees. But Lyndon says here, Saint Gregory Palamas is venerated in the Catholic East. Some hard doctrines that strict men athos hesychasts believe are either cautioned or bordering heresy. So I just want to quickly reference this. I plan on doing an interview with a Dominican priest on St. Maximus the Confessor and St. Thomas Aquinas, and seeing whether or not they are truly at odds with one another when you kind of push their doctrine to the fullest extent, this idea of God's energies and his essence, and the idea of God being simple. And the priest I'm going to interview, I think, is going to find as much ground as he can, but my understanding is that he's going to say when pushed to the fullest extreme, the two are in conflict. So that'll be a fascinating conversation. I don't know enough about it, so that's why I like to interview people who know a lot more than me so I can learn. So that'll be fun. Okay.
I will watch that for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's funny, these very kind of niche episodes, Maximus the Confessor, Thomas, that's what all of us geeks are super into. It's not like a huge YouTube clickbait thing, but it's probably what people want. Okay, well, this has been really fantastic, Evan. I just want to thank you for your time. This has just been beautiful. Do you blog anywhere online? Do you,
No, I am. I mean, I'm just a missionary. I spend most of my time just with the students that I'm walking with, and I'm with just individual, very personal relationships. I've thought about doing a blog or something like that before, but I don't. I make rap music.
What?
And I put that's on SoundCloud.
Oh, that's fantastic. Would you do me a favor? Send me, if you don't mind, send me a link to that. I'll put that up in the description so everyone can hear Evan's rap music. I got to say, I'm not hopeful, but I'm open to it being good.
I actually know how to rap. I will actually attest to this. I don't spend a lot of money on it, so it's not the best production quality you've ever heard in your life. It's not Pints with Aquinas. I'm actively trying not to accumulate more wealth in my life. So
Man, that's awesome.
But yeah, no, I mean, I do that. I mean, I'm always open to doing things like this, getting on here or anything like that. I mean, I'd be even open to doing a little thing for you, Matt, on your website or something. I'm not opposed to it. I've just never had the means or the opportunity to. I wish I could, but
Oh yeah, okay. So I would suggest, I want to just offer this to you, and I want you to pray about it. I want you to pray about kind of creating just a small, humble, little apostolate that maybe helps people reach out to their Buddhist friends by exposing them to the deep sort of mystical tradition in Christianity. So I'm going to invite you to pray about that, because if you make that happen, I will promote the heck out of it.
I will pray about it. You know, I might even reach out to Dan Burke or something and see what he has to say.
Yeah.
That'd be beautiful.
Maybe there's a way the two of you can collaborate.
Yeah.
All right, so here's how we're going to end. You're going to tell me what you're going to do for the rest of the day and something you're super looking forward to, and I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do for the rest of the day and what I'm super looking forward to. Go.
Okay. Right after this, I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to have dinner. I'm going to have lunch with two of my friends who just got married. They're both philosophy nerds just like me, and I'm sure they'll be crazy psyched to hear about this whole thing. And and then after that, I'm going to meet up with the man who changed my life in college, Jacob, the focus missionary who changed my life, who taught me how to love, who taught me what the Father was, who taught me what the Father's love was. And we're going to get some food before he goes back to England, where he lives. And then after that, I'm going to go to winery to hang out with a bunch of old pals from college, to drink some pints and to play games.
Oh, stop it. This sounds fantastic.
Home. Yeah,
that sounds fantastic.
That's my day.
well, do me a favor if you remember, and thank Jacob for me and for all of us watching. It's been cool. We have not dipped below 300 views for this entire hour and a half, so I'm sure this is going to reach a lot of folks. So thank you to Jacob. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the day, I'm going to finish up here, go get a bite to eat, and then I have a creek at the back of my property. If you're ever in Atlanta, let me know, because I'd love to invite you over. We got a creek at the back of our property, and it's, if you were to stand into it, it goes about knee high, right? So I've got these little chairs, these little beach chairs. Me and my friend, I'm going to go down there, put them in the water, sit in it, freezing cold water, boiling hot Georgia day. We're going to drink some beers, smoke some cigars, and talk about life.
Oh, I am going to smoke a pipe tonight.
Ah, good.
I am going to smoke a pipe tonight. But that sounds absolutely incredible. I might even just make a trip over to Georgia just to
where are
do
you?
that with
Where are you?
I'm in Missouri.
Oh,
so
you would be
far.
Well, it's a long way for me and 4 kids to drive, but if you wanted to come, you'd be very welcome. We have a spare bedroom. I'd honestly be glad to have you.
I'd love to do that. That'd be fantastic.
All right, brother. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Whenever I get off this and I want to watch it again for posterity's sake, what do I do?
Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop the YouTube video, then you and I will talk offline. Ready?
Okay,
Here we go.
All right.
See you,
God
everybody.
bless everybody.